Hey, everybody. My name is Dr. Scott Giacomucci. I'm the director and founder of the Phoenix Center for Experiential Trauma Therapy in Media, Pennsylvania. And today I wanted to talk about some of the signs that you might have complex PTSD or CPTSD. So complex PTSD isn't just about what happened to you. It's about how the past experiences have impacted your sense of self, your emotions, your relationships, your brain, your body, how it impacts your experience today. So if you struggled with ongoing symptoms related to trauma, here's some key signs that you might be experiencing CPTSD. So CPTSD manifests in the aftermath of complex trauma. Complex PTSD comes from complex trauma. So the difference between, traditional PTSD and complex PTSD, and the difference between trauma and complex trauma is that complex trauma really develops from prolonged, reoccurring layers and layers of trauma. Usually these take place within relationship, and oftentimes this takes place in childhood. So, for example, a reoccurring experience of abuse, or reoccurring experiences of neglect, or reoccurring experiences of domestic violence. These would all be examples of complex trauma. So complex trauma impacts us differently than other types of trauma. The original PTSD diagnosis was created studying adults that had experienced single incident traumas through war or through violence or through, actually, a lot of the research was with railway workers who were experiencing trauma while building the railroads across the United States. And so CPTSD really accounts for the unique ways that reoccurring experiences of trauma impact us differently than single experiences of trauma, and how trauma in childhood that's reoccurring impacts us differently than when we experience trauma as an adult. When we're an adult, we've got a more established sense of identity. We've got more autonomy in the world and in our lives and in relationships. We've got more of our brain is developed and online, and we're able to make sense of things. We've got more information and perspective that can help us navigate the trauma. But when we're a child, our brain's not fully developed. We don't have the same internal capacity or circuitry to regulate our emotions, or the same insights or perspectives to make sense of what just happened, or the ability to fight back, or the ability to run away in most cases. And so childhood trauma and reoccurring childhood trauma impacts us a bit differently than when we experience trauma in adulthood. So the common signs of complex PTSD, these are not in any specific order. So we've got emotional dysregulation. So feeling like you're constantly overwhelmed emotionally, or when you become connected to emotions and express emotions, it's really hard to calm yourself down afterwards. Or maybe you feel completely numb and disconnected from emotions, and it's really hard to get in touch with emotions. You might have really intense mood swings, or difficulty controlling emotions, or you might feel easily overwhelmed emotionally. Maybe you struggle with anger or shame or sadness. So this emotional dysregulation, that things feel really unstable emotionally or really chaotic emotionally quite often. The next area is a fragmented sense of self. And this often manifests in a sense of feeling like I'm broken, or feeling like something's wrong with me, or feeling unworthy or unlovable, or feeling like I'm a failure or the world will be better off without me, feeling really hopeless. So this often happens from internalizing blame for things that weren't really our fault, maybe blaming ourselves for the trauma we experienced, or feeling like the trauma we experienced was our fault, even though we know intellectually it couldn't have been our fault. So in this area of fragmented sense of self, the self-criticism or the self-hatred that we may experience from trauma can really make it difficult for us to accept compliments or to recognize positive qualities that we have. So we've got emotional dysregulation, disrupted sense of self, and difficulty with relationships. These are the three really key characteristics of complex PTSD that are like an add-on to classical PTSD symptoms. So difficulty with relationships, struggling with trust, feeling distant from others, struggling to feel safe when we're in an intimate relationship, or struggling to feel safe when we're in a close relationship with somebody because people in the past who we trusted or who were close to us took advantage of us or hurt us or harmed us or betrayed us. Feeling a fear of abandonment or a fear of rejection, that if I let somebody close to me, they're just going to abandon me or reject me at some point. So what's the point? Or feeling a sense of codependency or enmeshment with others, that we cling so hard to relationships because we're so afraid that somebody's going to leave us or abandon us or disappear. And so this can really lead to us attracting really toxic or abusive people to date or be in relationship with due to these learned survival patterns. So these first three areas, difficulty with emotions, relationships, and sense of self, are really at the core of complex PTSD. Additionally, some other signs that you might be experiencing CPTSD include dissociation or avoidance, avoiding people, places, or things related to the trauma, or experiencing a disconnection from your emotions, or feeling like you're zoned out constantly, or disconnected from yourself, or having difficulty with memory or gaps in your memory, losing track of time, or feeling like life is happening to somebody else. Another sign is if you're feeling a constant sense of hyperarousal or hypervigilance, feeling like you're not safe anywhere and that you constantly have to look over your shoulder, can't sit with your back to the door, or jump at loud noises, or physical touch is really difficult for you, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, really feeling like you're stuck in survival mode. These are all signs of complex PTSD and actually signs of classical PTSD as well. Additionally, experiencing flashbacks or feeling like you're reliving or re-experiencing the trauma from the past here and now, that there's triggers in the here and now that are activating things from the there and then. Experiencing nightmares or dreams related to trauma. These are all signs of PTSD and CPTSD. Furthermore, having really negative beliefs, negative moods, feeling like you can't experience joy anymore, that positive memories, positive emotions are just disconnected, are impossible. These are also symptoms and signs of PTSD and CPTSD. So if this sounds like you're definitely not alone. Far more people experience PTSD and CPTSD than anybody wants to admit. And most of the clients that I work with that have experienced trauma, they actually relate more to the CPTSD symptoms than to just the PTSD symptoms. So for folks that have experienced trauma, CPTSD really isn't that uncommon. There's some politics and some controversy about the diagnosis. It's not recognized in the United States, and insurance companies won't recognize it, and it's not recognized in the DSM, which is the big book of diagnoses. However, it is more recognized internationally, and it is recognized by the World Health Organization as a formal diagnosis. So what I really want you to know is that healing is possible, that trauma therapy has really evolved in the past 10 years especially, and is much more effective than it used to be. I see people every day, every week, heal from trauma and recover from PTSD and from CPTSD. It's not something that you have to suffer with forever. It's not a lifelong sentence or diagnosis. You certainly can heal from it. There is hope. So I really encourage you to seek out a local trauma therapist. PTSD and CPTSD are usually not something that we can think our way through or we can heal ourselves from without some additional support. If it was that easy, then everybody would be doing it. It really helps to be in therapy, to have access to a professional that specializes in trauma, who can really guide you and support you and walk with you on this healing journey. Similarly, support groups and trauma therapy groups can be incredible resources in healing from CPTSD. Remember, CPTSD is often caused by trauma in relationships. And so in recovery, relationships become that much more important. If we were harmed in relationship, then it makes sense that healing's got to take place in relationships too. If we experience trauma in groups or communities, it makes sense that the healing is going to come in groups and in community as well. As a therapist that provides both individual therapy and group therapy, I find that there's a power within group therapy that is impossible to tap into in individual therapy. The power of solidarity, of community, of validation, of peer support and mutual aid that exists exists within a therapy group, but doesn't exist in the same way in an individual therapy relationship. For many people, engaging in individual therapy at the same time as group therapy is a nice ideal balance. And if therapy is inaccessible, or you can't afford it, or you don't have insurance, first of all, there are nonprofits that offer low-cost therapy and other organizations that have really strived to make therapy more accessible. So I encourage you to really seek them out. And at the same time, you can find free support groups and free resources within your community and online. One of the simplest, most popular and helpful resources is ACA, 12-step meetings. ACA is adult children of dysfunctional and alcoholic parents. So most people with trauma can qualify to become members of ACA. ACA is one of the newer 12-step groups, programs. So it was created after PTSD was recognized as a diagnosis and after there was more language to talk about trauma, whereas some of the earlier 12-step programs were created 40, 50 years before PTSD was even recognized. And so they didn't have the same language to talk about trauma within the program. I recommend ACA to many of my clients and colleagues, and most of them find it incredibly helpful as a free community resource. So I really encourage you to check that out. Furthermore, any kind of practice that involves self-compassion, regulating your nervous system, learning how to ground yourself, art, movement, music, breath work can really help in coping with CPTSD. There was even some research where they found that yoga was more helpful than any medication that's ever been researched in healing from trauma. And just simply engaging in safe relationships, finding people in your life, friends, family, community members, mentors that you can trust, people who have integrity and ethics. Creating these relationships where you feel safe can indirectly help us heal from trauma in that they provide a corrective emotional relationship. They provide proof that relationships can be supportive, can be healing and helpful. So CPTSD and living with it can feel really overwhelming, but healing is definitely possible. If you relate to any of these signs of CPTSD, and if you take anything from this video, that's what I want you to hold on to. Hold on to hope that healing is possible. With the right support, with the right relationships and people in your life, you can certainly heal from what you've experienced in the past. So if you relate to any of these signs of CPTSD, if any of this resonates with you, I encourage you to let us know in the chat, in the comments. And if you found any sort of strategy or resource or healing avenue that's really helped you heal from CPTSD, please share that in the comments as well. Other people really will benefit from learning what's been helpful for you. If you found the video useful, I encourage you to like the video and subscribe to our channel. That way you'll get notified about future videos related to trauma.